He found his children sleeping in another woman's arms, and it changed everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and sin. Elias Vance, a widowed rancher hardened by years of silence, had one rule: no one touches his children. Not the neighbors, not the hired hands, not even God's mercy itself. But when the night wind swept through the old barn and his lantern caught the faintest glimmer of motion, the rule shattered. There she was, Rosalyn Hale, the woman he'd hired only to clean the stalls, now sitting in the hay with his sleeping twins pressed against her chest. Her lips moved in a broken lullaby, a song of mourning disguised as comfort. The firelight trembled across her tear-streaked face, and something inside Elias cracked like old timber under storm. He should have been furious. He should have sent her away by sunrise. Instead, he stood there watching the only warmth left in the West cradle, where hearts find hope in the dust. The wind carried the scent of ash and rain over the Wyoming territory, late autumn of 1887. The Vance Ranch sprawled across the valley, fences broken from storms, pastures gray from drought, and silence clinging to every board like dust that refused to leave. Elias Vance lived by habit, not hope. He rose before sunrise, fed the cattle, mended fences, and spoke only when necessary. His twins were the only light left, yet even they seemed to flicker in the endless cold. When Rosalyn Hale stepped off the stagecoach, no one noticed. She was small, pale, and quiet, carrying just one canvas bag and a sadness that never blinked. She asked for work, not pity. Elias gave her both the dirtiest job and the clearest rule: you stay out of the house. Yes, sir, she answered, eyes downcast. She kept her word. She worked until her fingers bled, until her reflection disappeared beneath the sweat and dirt. But even so, something in the air changed. The horses breathed easier, the nights grew quieter. The ranch hands noticed. They began to whisper that maybe the boss had taken in more than just a worker. What none of them knew was this: Rosalyn didn't come for shelter. She came to silence the ghosts that followed her from the grave she'd left behind. It began with a cry in the dark. A sharp, aching sound that sliced through the quiet like a knife through canvas. Elias woke instantly. The twins were screaming again, small fists pounding against their blankets, sobs echoing through the house like thunder. He tried to calm them, but they only cried harder, eyes wild with fear. Outside, in the barn loft, Rosalyn lay awake, staring at the rafters. She'd heard those cries before, not from these children, but from a voice that once belonged to her own. The memory tore through her like lightning. She couldn't lie still. Barefoot, she crept into the cold night, clutching a small cup of warm water and sugar. When she reached the doorway, Elias turned, startled, his revolver half drawn. "I can help," she said softly. "Please." "You're not allowed in here," he warned, but her voice didn't waver. "I know this kind of cry." He hesitated. Then, slowly, stepped aside. Rosalyn moved toward the crib, her hands trembling but sure. She dipped her finger into the water, touched it to the baby's lips. The child quieted, surprised, then sighed into sleep. The other followed soon after. Elias stood frozen, watching the woman he'd sworn to keep out heal what he couldn't touch. The flicker of firelight painted her face not beautiful, but steady, unshakable. When the silence returned, she whispered, "Sometimes they just need to know someone's there." Elias nodded once, the weight of years pressing against his chest. That night, the line between boss and stranger began to blur, and neither of them would ever sleep the same again. Morning came pale and thin, dragging light across the valley like a reluctant promise. Elias hadn't slept. The image of Rosalyn holding his twins haunted him not as a trespass, but as a question he couldn't name. He told himself it was nothing, a worker comforting a child. But when he passed her in the barn that morning, something inside him faltered. She stood by the trough, sleeves rolled, wrists raw from labor, humming softly to the mare. The sound was almost human, almost tender. "They sleep better now," Elias said quietly. Rosalyn startled, straightening. "I didn't mean—" He cut her off with a nod. "You did good." The words were small, but they hit her like thunder. For a woman who'd been invisible most of her life, acknowledgement was a dangerous gift. From that day, something in the rhythm of the ranch shifted. The children smiled when Rosalyn passed by. The horses followed her movements with calm eyes. Even Elias found himself pausing longer near the barn, watching her work with quiet precision. But the ranch had ears, and not all of them were kind. Mara Pike, the housemaid, saw everything. She'd worked for Elias since his wife's death, sharp-tongued, loyal in words but not in heart. Her eyes burned with something meaner than envy when she caught Rosalyn brushing the twins' hair by the porch one morning. "She thinks she's their mother now," Mara hissed to Harris, the foreman. Harris shrugged, chewing tobacco. "Boss don't seem to mind. That's the problem. Mun." By sundown, the whispers spread through every fence line and bunkhouse like wildfire. The widow's got her claws in the rancher. She ain't just cleaning the barn, she's cleaning her way into his bed. Those twins look an awful lot like her. Elias heard them too. He pretended not to. But silence doesn't kill gossip, it feeds it. That night, he sat alone at his desk, lamp burning low, papers untouched. Through the window, he saw the faint glow of lantern light in the barn. Rosalyn again. Always there, always working after dark. His mind whispered questions he didn't want to face. Was she trying to take something that wasn't hers, or had she already given more than anyone realized? He rose, set his hat on his head, and stepped into the cold. The barn door creaked under his touch. Inside, Rosalyn knelt beside the twins, who had wandered there from the house in the middle of the night. They were curled in the hay, peaceful under her shawl. "I was going to bring them back," she said quickly, rising. "They couldn't sleep." "I know." Elias's voice was softer than she expected. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. "They never do." Rosalyn hesitated, eyes glimmering with something like shame or maybe sorrow. "Sometimes, I think they miss her. Your wife." "She's been gone 3 years," Elias said. "They don't remember her, only the ache she left." Rosalyn swallowed hard. "I know that ache." Her words landed heavy. Elias saw, in the lamplight, a truth she hadn't spoken before, a grief that mirrored his own. He crouched beside her, voice low. "You lost a child." She nodded once. "He came too early. I buried him myself." The ground was frozen. Her voice cracked but didn't break. "Since then, every cry I hear feels like his. Every time I silence one, it's like I finally get to hold him again." The words burned through the air like confession in a church without mercy. Elias wanted to speak, but none came. He just stood there, a man who suddenly realized that pain recognized pain long before love ever could. By the next evening, the sky turned black. Clouds rolled over the valley, like cavalry charging in slow motion. The wind screamed through the fences, snapping branches and bending trees. Elias ordered everyone inside. "Tie down what you can. Get to cover before it breaks." But when the storm hit, it didn't knock, it invaded. Roofs peeled, fences shattered. Thunder shook the earth like judgment. Inside the main house, Elias ran from room to room, shouting over the howling wind. "Elsie! Emmett!" No answer. His blood turned to ice. The nursery door swung open empty. The blankets twisted, the window unlatched. He tore through the hall, boots pounding. "Rosalyn!" But Rosalyn was already outside. Through sheets of rain, he saw her, a small, drenched figure carrying both twins across the flooded yard toward the supply shed. Her shawl whipped away, her dress plastered to her skin. The children screamed in terror as lightning split the sky above. "Rosalyn!" Elias shouted, voice ripped away by wind. She didn't stop, didn't even look back. She stumbled once, caught herself, and kept going. When he finally reached the shed, she was crouched in the corner, both children wrapped in her arms like human shields. Her face was pale, lips trembling, but she was alive and so were they. He fell to his knees beside her, breath ragged. "You're mad," he said. "You could have been killed." Her reply came like a whisper carved from stone. "Better me than them." When the sun rose, half the ranch lay in ruin. A roof torn off, the fence line gone, water flooding the stables. But no one had died, not one soul. The hands gathered, battered and quiet, waiting for orders. Elias came out onto the porch, the twins in his arms, Rosalyn standing beside him, her shawl still damp. "There's talk going around," he said, voice cutting through the murmurs. "Talk about this woman. About things she's done, things she ain't. I'm done hearing it. UF." He looked at Mara, who shifted her gaze but didn't flinch. She saved my children last night while most of you hid from the storm. You want to question her place here? Then you question mine. No one spoke. Not a single word. Rosalyn stood taller beside him, hands clasped tight, head high for the first time since she arrived. She didn't need to speak. The silence said enough. That moment burned itself into the ranch, the image of a man and woman standing together against the gossip and the storm. But peace, like the morning sun, doesn't last long in the West. Weeks passed. The ranch healed, fences rebuilt, roofs patched. Rosalyn worked beside the men without complaint, her presence as steady as the mountains. Elias found himself relying on her not just for the twins, but for everything he'd forgotten how to feel. He caught himself smiling again, sometimes without reason. The children laughed more. Even the land seemed to breathe easier. Then came the sign. One morning, Rosalyn found it hammered into the dirt outside the gate. Fraud Mother scrawled in red paint. She froze. Her throat went dry. Someone had brought the town's poison to their doorstep. Elias rode back from the field to see her standing there, trembling. He read the sign, then ripped it from the ground in silence. "Who did this?" she whispered. "I'll find out," he said. But before he could, the rumor reached town. By evening the saloon was buzzing. The ranchers gone soft. The widows playing him for a fool. Maybe those twins are hers after all. The next day, a crowd gathered outside the general store, voices loud, angry, righteous. And at the center of it all stood Mara Pike. "She came here with nothing," Mara spat. "And now she's got the rancher's heart, his heirs, his land. Ask yourself what woman earns all that without lying through her teeth." Elias didn't wait for the answer. He spurred his horse into the crowd, dust and fury trailing behind him. When he dismounted, the square fell silent. "You want answers?" he roared. "Then you'll hear them from me." He looked at Rosalyn, who stood behind him clutching the twins. "She didn't steal anything. She didn't trick anyone. She gave this place its soul back, when all I gave her was pain." The crowd said nothing. The town preacher nodded once, hat in hand. One by one, the others turned away. But Mara didn't. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't one. "You'll regret this, Elias Vance. She's not what you think. She was right about one thing. The peace they fought for was about to be tested again with fire, steel, and blood." That night, silence came back, too quiet, too still. Rosalyn stirred from her bed before dawn, something cold pressing against her heart. The crib was empty. "Elias." He burst through the door, eyes wild. "They're gone?" "Yes, God, they're gone." Within minutes, the alarm bell rang through the valley. Lanterns lit, men mounted up. Tracks led north, small boots, larger prints beside them. They rode hard into the hills, Rosalyn gripping the saddle so tight her knuckles split. The wind howled through the pines as they followed the trail into a narrow ravine. Then a faint cry. Elias raised a hand. They dismounted, crept forward. The sound came from an old hunting cabin, half collapsed beneath a dead tree. Inside, through a crack in the wall, Rosalyn saw them, the twins, bound and gagged. And beside them stood Mara Pike, holding a revolver. "You've taken everything from me," Mara hissed. "I won't let you take him too." "Well, let them go," Elias said, stepping into the doorway, gun drawn. "They're mine," she screamed. "She doesn't deserve them." But before Mara could pull the trigger, Rosalyn lunged, knocking the weapon aside. The shot went wide, echoing through the woods. The two women crashed into the dirt, fists and fury. Mara fought like a snake, but Rosalyn fought like a mother. When it was over, Elias stood over them, gun steady. "It's done." Then, Mara's eyes flickered hate, then fear before the lawman dragged her away. Rosalyn collapsed beside the twins, pulling them close, whispering through tears, "Mama's here." When they returned to the ranch at sunrise, the valley felt different. The air was heavy but clean, washed by rain and gunpowder. Elias dismounted, looked at Rosalyn, her face bruised, eyes swollen, heart unbroken. "You saved them," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We saved each other." He stepped closer, hand trembling as he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You came here to clean my barn," he said. "But you cleaned my soul instead." Rosalyn smiled faintly. Maybe that's what I was meant to do. He didn't answer, just pulled her into his arms as the first light of dawn spilled over the ridge. The children clung to her skirts, and for a long moment, the world felt whole again. The days that followed felt borrowed, like moments stolen from a life neither of them believed they could have. The town quieted. The gossip dimmed. The children laughed again, and Elias began to think maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. He was wrong. Trouble in the West never rode in with thunder. It crept in under sunlight, smiling. A week after the kidnapping, the sheriff rode up to the ranch with a folded paper in his hand, and the kind of look that made a man's stomach turn. "Elias," he said, voice low, "you might want to sit down." The letter came from a lawyer out of Cheyenne, a man claiming to represent Jonathan Hale, Rosalyn's late husband, or what was left of him. The words were sharp and heavy. Property rights, inheritance disputes, accusations of deception. The man was alive. Elias read it twice before he could breathe. Rosalyn stood by the window, pale as frost. "He's dead," she whispered. "He was dead." Then who signed this?" Elias asked, setting the letter down like it might explode. She shook her head. "I buried him myself." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Lawyer says this Hale fella's coming to claim what's his. The woman, the land, maybe even the kids." That night, the ranch fell back into the silence it once knew. Rosalyn sat by the hearth, hands shaking. The twins slept nearby, their small breaths steady. Elias stood across the room, torn between the law and the truth. "If this man's alive," he said finally, "we'll face him." "And if he's not?" she asked. "Then someone's using his name to finish what Mara started." Her gaze lifted, steady despite the tremor in her voice. "Either way, it's my fault this house is in danger." Elias stepped closer, voice firm. "You saved this house. You saved me. I won't let anyone take that." But he couldn't shake the thought, what if she was wrong? What if ghosts could lie? The next evening, a rider approached. The sun was setting, bleeding red across the horizon, painting the man's silhouette in fire. He dismounted with the arrogance of someone who believed the world owed him something. "Name's Jonathan Hale," he said, "and I've come for my wife." Rosalyn's face drained of color. "You're not him." The man smiled, cruel and knowing. "Ain't that what they all say?" Elias stepped forward, hand near his gun. "You've got one chance to leave. But the man only laughed, tossing a paper onto the dirt. "You've got one day to hand her over, or the law'll come do it for you." When he rode away, the wind carried his laughter like a curse. Night fell heavy and long. The ranch hands whispered about packing up. Fear, once buried, had returned in full gallop. Rosalyn couldn't sleep. She watched the fire burn low until the shadows swallowed it whole. Elias found her there near dawn. "You trust me?" he asked. "With my life? Then don't run. What are you planning?" He loaded his revolver, slid the cylinder shut with a click that sounded like finality. "To make sure no one ever tries to take you again." No, she wanted to tell him not to fight. But some things in the West weren't built to be won by words. By noon, dust rose on the horizon, 6 riders, led by the man calling himself Hale. They came fast and loud, the ground trembling under their charge. The ranch hands scattered to cover, rifles ready. Elias stepped out first, hat low, eyes cold. Rosalyn stood behind him with the twins inside the house. "This doesn't have to end in blood," Elias called out. The fake Hale grinned. "Everything worth taking does." The first shot cracked through the air like lightning. The fight was on. Gunfire erupted, echoing across the valley. Men shouted, horses screamed. Elias moved like a man who'd fought loss before calm, deliberate, deadly. He dropped one rider with a clean shot, another with the next. But the imposter rode straight through the smoke toward the house. Inside, Rosalyn grabbed the shotgun from the mantel. Her hands shook, but her aim was steady. When the door burst open, she pulled the trigger. The blast knocked the man back through the doorway, smoke and dust filling the room. Elias reached her moments later, chest heaving. The man lay still in the dirt. Rosalyn dropped the gun, her breath coming in broken waves. "He's gone." Elias knelt beside the body, tore open the man's coat and froze. Inside was a letter addressed to Mara Pike. "She wasn't done," he whispered. This wasn't just revenge, it was her insurance. By sundown the sheriff arrived. He looked at the scene, the body, the blood. "You had no choice," he said. "He wasn't here for justice." Elias nodded, but his eyes were on Rosalyn, the way she trembled, the way the children clung to her skirts. She looked like someone who'd been forced to kill a part of herself just to survive. That night, after the lawmen left, Elias sat with her on the porch. The stars stretched wide over the plains, cold and eternal. "I thought I came here to bury my past," she said quietly. "But the past doesn't die, does it?" "No," Elias said. "But it can stop chasing you if it finds something stronger." She looked at him, eyes glistening in the starlight. "Like what?" "Like home." He reached for her hand, rough against soft, and for the first time in years, both of them stopped shaking. The next morning, life returned slowly. The twins played in the yard, chasing dust motes through the Sunday. Rosalyn hung sheets on the line, wind tugging at her hair. Elias fixed the gate where the bullet had splintered it. But peace in the West always costs something. As he worked, he saw something on the horizon, a lone rider, dressed in black, carrying a letter sealed in red wax. The messenger handed it to him without a word and rode off. Elias broke the seal. His eyes scanned the words. Notice of claim estate of Ruth Vance, his late wife. Rosalyn approached, concern darkening her face. "What is it?" He folded the letter slowly. "It's not over." Her breath caught. "What do they want now?" Elias looked toward the mountains, the wind picking up dust between them. "Everything that was hers." Her eyes met his, fear flickering beneath resolve. "Then they'll have to take it from us both." That night, the fire burned bright inside the house that had once been cold. The twins slept soundly, their dreams untroubled. Rosalyn sat by the window, watching the storm clouds gather again in the distance. Elias joined her, setting a hand on her shoulder. "They'll come," she said softly. "They always do. But this time," she whispered, turning to face him, "we won't just survive it." He met her gaze, steady as the horizon. "No. This time, we'll fight for it." Outside, thunder rumbled once more, not the kind that frightened, but the kind that promised change. Somewhere beyond the valley, men were already stirring, papers being signed, greed awakening. But inside the Vance ranch, two souls scarred, stubborn, and stitched together by loss, had found something worth defending. And when the next storm came, they'd stand side by side beneath the same wide sky. Because out here, love wasn't gentle. It was the only kind that survived. The following morning broke soft and golden, light spilling across the valley like forgiveness. For the first time in months, the wind carried no scent of gunpowder or fear, only the sweetness of wet earth after the rain. Elias stood at the fence line, his hat low, watching the sun climb over the ridge. Behind him, the ranch stirred to life. The twins chased each other near the corral, laughter echoing against the mountains. Rosalyn hung linens in the morning breeze, her dress glowing pale against the sky. The letter from the courthouse still sat unopened on the table inside. He'd decided it could wait. Some battles were worth fighting, others weren't worth the air they cost. He turned when he heard the soft creak of the porch step. Rosalyn stood there, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She smiled faintly, tired but warm. "Fence looks good," she said. "Storm took half of it down. Thought I'd fix what I can before it all falls again." She stepped closer, offering him the cup. "You can't fix everything alone, Elias." He took the mug, eyes on the horizon. "No, but I can try." "Then let me try too," she said. He looked at her, then really looked, and for the first time, the ghosts behind his eyes seemed to fade. "You already have," he whispered. They stood in silence for a while, the world wide and alive around them, the kind of quiet that wasn't empty anymore. Later that day, the preacher came riding up the trail. He'd heard of the shootout, the storm, the lies. "God's been busy on this land," he said with a half smile. "And maybe it's time he saw some joy return to it." Elias knew what he meant before the words were said. The preacher didn't ask if he wanted to marry Rosalyn, he simply asked when. By sundown, the barn was lit with lanterns. The same barn, where she had once been caught holding his children, now stood draped in white sheets and wildflowers. The hands gathered quietly. No grand speeches, No choir, just the smell of hay and the warmth of light. Rosalyn walked down the aisle made of straw, the twins ahead of her scattering petals they'd picked from the meadow. She wore a simple cream dress, the same she'd arrived in, now mended and clean. Her eyes found Elias's, steady and sure. The preacher spoke few words about loss, about grace, about the kind of love that survives ruin. And when Elias took Rosalyn's hands, his voice trembled just once. "You were supposed to clean my barn," he said softly. "Instead, you cleaned my life." Rosalyn smiled, tears glinting. "You gave me a place to belong." When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the hands cheered, hats tossed into the air. The twins clapped, laughing. Elias pulled Rosalyn close, not with hunger or desperation, but with a quiet certainty, the kind that only comes after hell has been weathered. The fire burned late into the night. Music drifted from a fiddle someone had found in the loft. People danced, drank, and told stories until the stars gave up their places to dawn. And when the last lantern flickered out, the ranch slept not in fear, but in peace. Elias woke before sunrise. He stepped outside, barefoot, the ground cool beneath his feet. The air was clean, alive. In the distance, the first light kissed the hills. He turned to see Rosalyn standing in the doorway, shawl around her shoulders, eyes soft and knowing. "You keep staring at the horizon," she said. "What do you see out there?" He smiled. "Tomorrow." She walked toward him, bare feet brushing against dew-soaked grass. When she reached him, she slipped her hand into his. "Then let's meet it together." And they did, standing side by side as the sun broke open over the land. For the first time since the war, since loss, since everything that had once turned life to ash, Elias Vance felt whole. The ranch still bore scars, fences still needed mending, but he had learned something no man could teach. Sometimes the West didn't need taming, sometimes it only needed someone brave enough to stay. As the light spread across the valley, he whispered the words he'd carried since the night he found her in that barn. "She came here to clean the dust from my floors," he said, voice thick with quiet awe. "But she cleaned the dust from my soul." Rosalyn leaned her head against his shoulder, the children playing in the fields below them, laughter rising with the wind. The land was still wild, the world still cruel, but for that moment it was theirs. And beneath the endless sky of Wyoming, love didn't just survive. It endured. Years later, travelers passing through the valley still spoke of the night the storm nearly took Thorn Creek and the woman who saved it. They said the barn lights never went out that night, that angels must have been working beside her in the dark. By then, few remembered the rumors, the signs in red paint, the whispers about bloodlines and lies. Time had a way of burying cruelty deeper than any grave. What they did remember was her laughter drifting from the porch, her hands mending torn shirts and broken spirits, her name spoken with quiet respect. Rosalyn Vance, the woman who stayed. Children born long after the war grew up, hearing about the ranch on the ridge, where kindness lived longer than bitterness. Every autumn, when the wind carried the scent of rain, people said they could still hear a lullaby riding the breeze, the same song she'd once sung to two frightened children in a barn full of ghosts. Elias aged slower than most men in the valley. Maybe it was love, or maybe it was purpose. He still woke before dawn, still mended fences, still carried the same tin cup to the fields every morning. But he didn't drink coffee alone anymore. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the cottonwoods, he stood with Rosalyn on the porch, their hair silvered by the years, the twins now grown and working the land. He looked out over the valley, the fences rebuilt, the fields alive again. "This land was dying before you came," he said softly. "Now look at it." Rosalyn smiled, eyes reflecting the gold of the horizon. The land just needed someone to believe in it again. He nodded slowly, voice roughened by age and memory. "So did I." The wind swept through the grass, whispering against the boards, stirring the faint echo of a lullaby that had once tamed storms in silent sorrow. Below the porch, the grandchildren's laughter rose into the air, mixing with the hum of the plains, a sound that promised the world still had room for mercy. As night settled, Elias reached for her hand, their fingers intertwined, steady, unshaken by time. "Do you think they'll remember us?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, smiling faintly. "But if they don't, they'll remember what we built." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a long, quiet moment, neither spoke. The world had broken them once. But love, raw, unpolished, and stubborn as the West itself, had pieced them back together. And when the last light of day slipped beneath the hills, the ranch that had once been nothing but dust and grief stood tall against the horizon, proof that even in the hardest country on earth, some hearts never stop fighting to come home.